Hello, detectives. Welcome to the strangest case to ever hit this department. We're calling it Operation Peace, Love, and Murder. Catchy, right? What we have isn't your typical murder case. This one stretches decades. You've been told the summer of love brought peace, freedom, and the dawn of new consciousness. That tie-dye and acid tabs were a harmless rebellion. But I'm here to show you what slipped through the cracks. I'm here to show you how flower power rotted from the inside out and birthed what is now called the golden age of serial murder. Between 1960 and 1990, America got weird. Like acid tripping at Woodstock and hitchhiking with a stranger named Moonbeam. Weird. People were dropping out of society, finding themselves, making their own religion, ideals, and communities. Harmless, right? Wrong. We were distracted by peace signs and Woodstock echoes while monsters walked among communities and music festivals. We're not just talking Manson. We're talking patterns, cover-ups, cults with branding, and a cultural movement that made it all start. You all have been assigned to this case and have the case files in front of you. Inside you'll find your leads, profiles, timelines, all the good stuff. As I lay out the evidence, you'll follow along with the proof in your file. Keep up, connect the dots, draw your own conclusions. But know this, by the end, you'll see what I see. Now grab your files, adjust your third eye, and let's begin.
The origins of the hippie movement. After World War II, America was booming. The economy surged, suburbs spread, and a new middle class settled into its so-called American dream. But under all that prosperity, some people felt something was missing. A sense of emptiness, a loss of meaning. They saw a culture obsessed with money, conformity, and consumer goods, not with truth, art, or the soul. That's when a new voice emerged, the Beat Generation. Writers like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William S. Burroughs rejected materialism and the status quo. They searched for raw experience, spiritual depth, and personal freedom. The Beats found inspiration in jazz, Eastern philosophy, and most importantly, psychedelics. Hallucinogens, LSD, or lysergic acid diethylamide, first emerged in the 1950s through government-backed experiments, most notably the CIA's MK-Ultra program, which tested the drug's potential for mind control. This eventually slipped through the scientists' hands to the public, and LSD quickly became a symbol of rebellion, spiritual awakening, and artistic exploration. It spread through college campuses, beatnik circles, and the public like wildfire. However, this psychedelic wave also brought instability, delusion, and in some cases, psychosis. All of the undeveloped minds, overstimulated on LSD, groups constantly having this in their system, looking for abstract views and beliefs that made sense to them. But this was only the start. Cities like San Francisco became symbolic havens for freedom and self-discovery, drawing in thousands of teenagers who sought to escape their suburban homes. But these teenagers fell into poverty, drug addiction, and exploitation, rejecting all authority and structure. Summarize, there were a ton of drugged, underdeveloped teenagers running around the most populated cities, preaching to love and trust everyone you meet. A perfect mix for predators and damaged minds to finally find a group to control with little interference. Psychedelic music festivals and communal gatherings became outlets for expressing dissent, while influential artists like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan gave voice to anti-war ideals. San Francisco was hot that year, not just in degrees but in something else. Something electric. You could feel it pulsing through the pavement of Haight Street, pouring out of the storefronts, trailing behind barefoot kids with flowers in their hair. We didn't know what to call it at first, but soon the newspapers gave it a name, the Summer of Love. They came by tens of thousands, kids from Nebraska, Boston, Florida, middle class, working class, dropouts, and straight-A students. They flooded in on buses and beat up Chevys, carrying guitars and dreams of peace. The Human Beaten, January 27, or Monterey Pop Festival, June 27, were highlights of the Summer of Love and definitely showed the vulnerability of hippie groups in the public. Little did the public know some were taking notes. Some were preparing for a time to use this to their power. Some were ready to make a difference, good or bad. Introducing Charles Manson. One of these predators taking notes was our first shocking result of hippie culture, Charles Manson. Charles Manson had a background of crime and imprisonment. Following his release from prison in 1967, he moved to San Francisco during the height of the hippie movement and quickly attracted a group of disillusioned young followers, mostly women, who came to see him as a spiritual leader. He was said to be hypnotic, manipulative, and all around the perfect mix for a cult leader. These women are young, abused, and looking for answers from a leader they can rely on. Charles saw this. He used seduction, false comfort, and drug abuse to form his disciples and name this easily manipulated group of hippies the Manson family. He uses the hippie culture and dives into all brands of soul-searching, like Buddhism, Scientology, Hinduism, Christianity, and adds in his own teachings. Charles constantly liked to test his disciples' faith. He needed to make sure they would do whatever he said, no matter how dark or outrageous. He would gather his family and gave unhealthy doses of LSD, his form of communion. Though most of the time he would not be drugged himself, but instead used this time to manipulate his followers to believe he was the chosen Messiah they needed to praise. This escalated to a new test of faith. The night of August 8, 1969, was madness choreographed by a man who never held the knife himself. There was a quiet house tucked in the Hollywood Hills, owned by music producer Terry Melcher. By the summer of '69, actress Sharon Tate lived there with director Roman Polanski. She was 8 months pregnant. Polanski was out of the country. At about 10:30 p.m., Manson gave the order. 4 of his followers, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, climbed into a car with instructions to kill everyone inside. His words, "Make it as gruesome as you can." Around midnight they arrived. First victim was 18-year-old Stephen Parent, wrong place, wrong time, shot 4 times in his car before he could even scream. Then they broke into the house. Tex led the charge, knife and a .22 revolver in hand. Inside, Shannon Tate, her friends. They were beaten, stabbed, and shot. Sometimes all 3. Why? Manson believed in something called Helter Skelter, a race war the Beatles were predicting in their songs. Or so he believed. He wanted to frame the murders on black revolutionaries and kickstart his fantasy apocalypse. Without his traction in the hippie movement, this wouldn't have happened. He observed the manipulation he could cause on this new movement and used it to his advantage. Another like him, Jim Jones and the People's Temple. All the way back in the mid-1950s, a charismatic preacher named Jim Jones founded what he called the People's Temple in Indiana. At first, it appeared to be a progressive Christian church, one that preached racial integration, social justice, and equality, rare values in the segregated Midwest, matching with the hippies' views and pulling in a generation of rejected youth. But behind the sermons was a man obsessed with control, adoration, and apocalyptic visions. By the late 1960s, Jones saw an opportunity. America's youth were turning away from traditional religion and authority, swept up by the counterculture movement. As hippies searched for meaning in the chaos of war, civil rights struggles, and political corruption, Jones offered them something different, a utopia, where race, class, and injustice would no longer divide people. Jonestown. As the hippie movement encouraged communal living, psychedelic exploration, and spiritual experimentation, the People's Temple positions itself as a sanctuary. Many disillusioned young people, especially runaways and activists, were drawn in. But once inside, Jones used classic cult tactics: sleep deprivation, drug manipulation, public humiliation, and a constant paranoia. Members were convinced that the outside world was evil. And finally, at the Commune, Jones ordered his final act, what he called revolutionary suicide. Over 900 people, including 300 children, were forced or manipulated into drinking a cyanide-laced fruit drink. Kool-Aid, but deadly. Some were coerced by armed guards, others psychologically broken. On that day, Jonestown became the site of the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act, until 9/11. Similarly, killers like the Zodiac Killer, Candyman, and the Co-Ed Killer all used hippie culture to craft, defend, and fuel their killings. Though not only did the hippie movement cause these predators to prounce at this time, but seeing the fame these serial killers acquired from these murders continued the popularization of serial killers into the 90s. Shortened list of this being Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, the Night Stalker, the Green River Killer, Son of Sam, Albert Fish. The list goes on.
Well, detectives, case closed. We followed the trail through flower fields and acid trips, past vans covered in peace signs, and straight into the darkest corners of America's soul. What started as a movement of peace and love turned out to be the perfect breeding ground for madness, for serial killers. The Free Your Mind crowd didn't realize that some minds needed to stay locked up. From Charles Manson turning peace into poison, to Herbert Mullen hearing voices through the smoke, to the cults that promised salvation but delivered slaughter, like Jim Jones. The patterns were loud, the signs were there. Hippies didn't just drop out of society. They dropped their inhibitions, their structure, their grip on reality, and in that void, predators thrived. Nice work, detectives. You followed every lead, peeled back every layer of psychedelic confusion, and saw the truth hiding behind the tie-dye. Until the next case, keep your minds sharp, and next time someone offers you Kool-Aid, read the fine print.